Welcome back to the Amid the Mess podcast, where I talk all about health and happiness and well-being, but I make it relevant for us parents because let's face it, life's a little different when it's not just yourself you're looking after, and doing the healthy things become a little bit more complicated. So, today, I spoke with Sally Stockreisser, who is an emotional empowerment coach. She teaches people how to transform their emotional experience. And I just love speaking with her. This is the second interview she's done with me. She did one right at the beginning when I just launched the podcast. So go ahead, listen to that if you want. But today we go into a bit more depth into the negative, the negative emotions of parenting. She wouldn't use the word negative. In fact, she has much more useful language that she talks about, so I'll let her describe that. But it's the things such as anger, sadness, or a little bit of feeling low. I wouldn't say depressed, but all the things that you can find when you are mourning your life that you had before children, when you were much freer to do what you wanted, or when you're angry and frustrated because there are just so many things on your to-do list and you've got to get everyone having breakfast and get the shoes on and get the coats on and get to school or nursery in time, and or you're angry about work and you're finding it difficult not showing that at home. So we talk about emotions. And I think it's relevant for all of us. It's relevant for me, from my family, how we navigate things at home. So I talk about plenty of personal examples here as well. And I think this conversation will be very useful for almost every parent out there. But before we get into it, I always try to remember to talk a little bit about where I'm at in my journey of health and happiness and parenting. And so something was going through my mind this last week in that, so now I've got two children. One is 4, just turned 4, and one, she just turned 1. And I've reached the stage where I actually look at the children and think, wow, I am so lucky and I have to enjoy this moment. And that's only just really starting, and it's a real shift in my mind. Whereas when we first became parents, it was such a shock to me, and everything was tough, everything was difficult, and my mind was just a lot more on the dreary side of things. So, I feel I've turned a corner. I wanted to share that. I feel a lot less rushed now with my transition back into work with little baby Daisy. I feel okay with taking it slowly. I feel okay with the fact that she's only got a few days at nursery, and I realize now how quickly the time goes, and I have so much more peace with that actually I want more time with her before she grows up. Excuse me. And the first time round, I was so kind of, I want to get back to working, and I want to do that again, and I feel so cooped up. So yeah, that is a bit of a change, and a positive one. I'm very curious to notice that in myself. Anyway, that's me. But now we're going to get on to our conversation with Sally, all about the challenging emotions of parenting and how we can deal with those in a much more empowering way. So, I hope you enjoy it. Negative emotions happen. We all know that. But could you please tell us, what is one big misconception about negative emotions?
Yeah, and I think the misconception I'm going to talk about is actually in the name. So quite often we think of negative emotions as being representative of who we are in a bigger sense, who we are as a person, our value, which is almost an idea that if we're experiencing negative emotions, maybe that indicates something negative about us. It's actually why I tend to use disempowering emotions or challenging emotions as phrases that I use instead, just because I think it's so easy for us to have that misconception that challenging or negative emotions might mean something negative about us. Whereas actually, what I support my clients with, and the message that I have for everyone, is that, as you say, those challenging emotions are a completely natural and normal part of being human. They're a natural part of all of our experience. And whilst we can have amazing impact in terms of reducing those and moving our experience to ways that serve us much better, those emotions absolutely do not show any lack of value or worth or ability in us as people at all. In fact, when we think about emotions as being physical sensations in the body that are produced by our brain, I always say to my clients, if you had a headache, for example, those are physical sensations. They're not pleasant. They're negative. You'd prefer not to be having them. But actually, you see it as something that you just need to support yourself through, something that naturally happens sometimes. And you can take steps to support yourself without that headache meaning something big or significant about you as a person. And so I would offer the same with emotions. We want to start seeing them for the pure sensations that they are, so that we can better support ourselves without the judgment that might come with that.
That's beautiful. And what is the difference? So if you compare, if someone were feeling the emotions of anger and frustration and sadness, or the more disempowering emotions, I will use your language. If someone were to feel those things, how would their experience be different if you compare them kind of identifying with them and almost judging themselves for having that? And then in the way that you like to help people, if they are removed from that need to attach to it, kind of if they can see it more like a headache, how does that eventually differ in their overall experience?
It brings a huge reduction in the amount of emotional intensity that we feel, because quite often what happens normally, and what was my experience before as well, is that our brain is producing those natural challenging emotions, and then it's layering on additional emotions on top. So, for example, you said maybe you're feeling angry. Let's say a situation's happened at home and that's led you to feel understandably angry in that moment. It's also possible to then layer on that layer of judgment that comes in as well. Let's say we have, because our thoughts, our conscious and subconscious thoughts are what generate our emotions. So if we then have thoughts that are, or this anger is showing that I'm not a very capable parent, or this anger is showing that I'm a not very kind parent, and before you know it, we've got both the anger and we've got the intensity of that kind of judgment coming in as well. And so when we can move to simply seeing them as sensations that our brain is naturally producing, rather than them indicating something about us as a parent or a person, you can see that a whole layer of kind of extra weight is removed. I used to constantly I didn't realize at the time until I had the chance to reconsider it, but I used to be wading through emotional challenges, but also carrying around quite a lot of self-criticism in relation to those as well. And so I would offer it's just a weight removed when we can see them more as the sensations that they are.
I love that. So, well, you just talked a little bit about what you used to do. So, as in this podcast, I really like to help support parents going through the crazy roller coaster that is looking after young children or teenage children. And as I know from experience, there are so many emotions involved, from the parents and from the children. So, in your own experience, I know you've got teenage children, I think. What have you learned? And at what point did you find it challenging? And then how did you learn how to manage challenging emotions during your parenting journey?
Yes, I am lucky enough to have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old. So I have had quite some years to do some learning, although I would say that the learning never stops. And I think you're just always learning. And I think you're absolutely right because, being a human is constantly navigating a world of emotion, whether you're the child or the adult. Like you say, that is a set of situations and circumstances that will always have quite a lot of emotions tied in with that. But what I would offer is that one of the things that I recognized when I first had children was that I often used to think to myself, I'm only ever as content, I'm only ever as secure, I'm only ever as calm as I want to feel according to everybody else. Almost like as long as my children were in a good emotional place, then that would finally mean that I could be as well. I used to feel like my emotions were absolutely totally tied in with theirs, and so the days felt quite daunting because I didn't really know what was going to come my way and what their needs would be and whether I could meet them. Whereas when I realized that actually, of course, somebody's emotions around you are going to have influence, but that it's still possible to support yourself through that, no matter what comes your way each day, that's a very different place to be. And I think recognizing that we have an ability to support ourselves emotionally, no matter what our children are navigating, because our emotions come from inside of ourselves, that we can absolutely show up for our children in the best possible way, and we can want to provide them with the best emotional experience that we can try to influence and bring about for them, but that ultimately our experience is still separate to theirs. So there's still so much opportunity for us to support ourselves with our experience, even when it's challenging.
Ah, yes. That is so important because we have a 4-year-old and he's just coming out of the like twos and threes, all the crazy emotions, but there are still lots of crazy emotions. And we have, as parents, we have now learned a little bit like when he's going through a crazy roll on the ground, I don't want to eat breakfast. Actually, it's only now 4 years in that we've almost learning how to like, okay, let him go through it. We don't have to go with him in this situation. But there have been many times in the past where we've been dragged along in the emotional experience. So it is tricky.
Definitely. And I think that's such a wonderful example to share because I can also recognize that when I became a parent. And what I think I realized is that I had a lot of thoughts about my success in inverted commas, because I don't even know what that would look like. But I was thinking that my success as a parent was going to be shown by the feelings my kids were experiencing. Almost like if I was doing okay as a parent, if I was doing well as a parent, that would mean my children basically were happy all the time. And although I understand where that came from, there were two problems with that. One, I was taking a responsibility that wasn't mine to have, because their emotions are their own and they're coming from their own brain. And so the best we can possibly do is provide the best influence, but we can't actually have direct impact and responsibility. We can only just provide our best environment. And so I think I misunderstood that kind of level of responsibility. And I also think I was directly making their emotions mean something about me as a parent. Whereas you're absolutely right, and obviously my kids are also totally navigating the world of emotions. And actually, we want them to learn to do that in a safe and secure environment, don't we? Because I grew up in a home where it was full of love, it was very secure, but there was a definite message that was, if someone's got an emotion that's challenging, something's gone wrong, let's immediately fix it. And it didn't give me that opportunity to learn how to regulate myself. And I would offer that that's what you're giving your son that opportunity to. Is coming from a place of love, isn't it? It's not from a place of like disinterest or disregard, but like actually, if he goes through that emotion that he's having to do with the breakfast on that day, right? But it might be to do with all sorts of other things in like the years to come. actually he's getting a full opportunity to be present with that emotion and allow it to pass in a way that he learns from that experience in terms of regulating himself. So as long as everybody else is safe and secure and he's not, and he is, completely safe within what he is doing, and that feels appropriate, then actually he's getting an opportunity to learn to calm himself down, isn't he? And he's learning to essentially self-regulate. Whereas I think when I first started parenting, I wasn't giving my children the chance to learn to self-regulate because I was just such a people pleaser. So I just took that lens to my parenting. And so for me, my brain just filled with, oh my goodness, what are all the things that I could suddenly do as actions that would hopefully bring about a change in their emotion. Almost kind of firefighting, very disempowering place to be, actually, because it just feels like you're waiting to see what comes at you and you're hopefully going to pull something out the bag. Whereas you're quite right, when your son is in that moment, that is his emotion coming from his own brain, and you can provide love and compassion and patience and tolerance and support. But that actually what would support him, I would offer, is the opportunity to sometimes be present with that and learn to self-regulate.
Yeah, I love it. That is great. And now that seems really intuitive to me. But like I said, only 4 years in, and I think it's taken us this amount of time since he turned two, to realize actually we just need to let him stew for a bit. Just let him stew. He's good. That's how I say it to Michael, my husband. Now he just needs to stew. He's good. And I think the temptation for parents is always to to fix it, like you say. And against that, one of the most helpful things I have ever heard is, as parents, our responsibility isn't to make our children happy. And if you think because if you wanted to make your child happy all the time, you would always give your child ice creams every hour because that would make them in the moment very happy, or you'd do all the little short-term hedonic happiness things that in the long, aren't actually good for your child. So it's okay not to be making your child happy in that particular moment.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, happy is really fascinating in itself because that's quite an elated emotion, isn't it? Like that's quite high up there on the kind of desirable emotion spectrum. And I think that's quite interesting as well because we often use the word happy, and I definitely used to think that way as well with my own kids. And now, it's wonderful to see them when they're happy. That's brilliant. But actually, what is a normal human experience is all of the mixtures of emotions, isn't it? And so I would offer that concepts like resilience, like it's wonderful to think that we can support our kids with emotional resilience, that emotions can come along and that we can manage those in a way that that don't impact us in ways that don't serve us. So actually having the opportunity to navigate those and experience them, like you're saying, means that we can show up for them in our best way and problem solve in that instance. Like you say, the next dose of sugar isn't necessarily, it's understandable, of course it is, and we're all just trying our best. So I'm not here to suggest what people should or shouldn't be doing, but like you say, when it comes from a slightly more detached place where you're seeing that it's actually an impossibility to give them a certain emotion, you're just there to support them in the best possible way. I don't know if you found this, but I found that I had a lot more kind of conscious problem solving and choice opportunity as a parent too, because it gave me more options to think about what was best for them rather than like that knee jerk, oh my goodness, I must fix it straight away feeling.
Yeah. So what do you mean? Sorry. So the difference. So as a parent, it gave you a different opportunity. So sorry, go into detail. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I just mean that it gives you a different opportunity when you can see that you're not ultimately responsible for making your child happy. It just gives you more opportunity to problem solve that and decide what might be best for them rather than doing the immediate thing that you think might make them happy.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I get it. I get it now. So moving on a bit to the as parents, our emotional experience. So you know, all parents get angry, get frustrated. We're currently going through a phase where we feel quite cooped up because, we got a baby, we've got a 4-year-old, and the baby needs the nap all the time and is still very clingy. So, like, the social life isn't great at the moment. So, have you got any words of wisdom for parents feeling when the parents go through negative emotions? Let's start with anger, and then we can move on to the next one. So if we start off with a parent is angry, maybe even at something the child is doing, or at the situation, or even with work, just has anger. What's a more empowering way to deal with that when you're around your children? That might even be teaching them a lesson about emotional regulation.
Yeah, I mean, we can all recognize anger, right? That's just such a natural one that comes up for all of us. Yeah, I think when we're in anger and that's the feeling that we're experiencing in that moment, it's very easy to react and say things and do things almost without a kind of awareness. And often things that we do when we're feeling angry don't necessarily serve us that well. They kind of feel like they give us a quick release. But actually, when that kind of anger has passed, we can look back and think that was natural and normal and human, and that's okay. But it just didn't necessarily work that well. And what I generally found was that when I was coming from a place of anger, I would look back and think that didn't really work for me, but also often didn't work for how I was around my children. So what I would offer is a more empowering way of managing that is starting to notice when you're actually experiencing anger, because it's so easy for our brain to be caught up in the detail and it's not necessarily noticing the feeling that's happening. So we're often caught in the milk that is all over the floor or the thing that has immediately happened, rather than noticing that the reason that's so intense is because we're feeling the feeling that is anger. And once we've got that kind of perspective, it's possible then to have a moment just to pause. And if there's an opportunity, I mean, I remember teaching myself just to keep my lips closed because I thought if my lips are closed, I'm not going to speak. And actually, even if that just gave me just a couple of seconds, it would kind of interrupt that moment long enough for me to think about how I could take a next step. And the logical question is, well, what might the next step be? So what I would offer is, if you're in the middle of anger, one of the things that can be quite helpful is recognizing that the sooner that emotion can pass, the better that we feel as individuals and the better that that situation can be navigated. So quite often it's useful to do that by, if it's safe to do so, taking yourself away from that situation. So for example, if you've got children that are slightly older, it might be safe to walk into another room, for example, and just give yourself a couple of moments in a room separate to where they are, so that you can start to feel that emotion begin to pass a little bit. Just long enough to feel like you can start thinking a little bit more clearly. But also, if you're in a situation with a child and there's not an opportunity to take a step out, it's amazing how deep abdominal breathing is something our brain naturally associates with relaxation and safety. So although it takes a little while to practice this and embed it, that's the reason why taking a really big sigh can sometimes feel really good. In fact, when we're angry, sometimes, I don't know if you've noticed, we can almost feel ourselves doing a really big sigh in frustration and anger. Yeah, exactly that. And because taking deep, lower abdominal breaths is something our brain associates with relaxation and safety, it's just something small that you can do in a moment that provides that pause that you're looking for, so that you can just check in with yourself and make a decision that about how to proceed, but also that slight relief. I would offer another thing that's quite helpful is if you feel a need to talk about feeling angry, which is really normal, because we're trying to tell other people why a situation is feeling that way for us. What I find really helpful is always speaking in the first person. So I'm sharing my experience and my emotion, whereas quite often we're in a habit of talking about other people. So maybe if I just give you an
Mm.
example, let's say I don't mind, my child's refusing to eat dinner, and because of other things that built up in that on that day, or maybe this theme is an emerging theme, I get a rush of anger. In that moment, it would be completely normal for me to say, "You're being selfish. You don't deserve this dinner. I can't believe you are thinking of doing this when I've done so much for you today already." You know, my brain's got it all ready to go, right? You. Whereas actually, that introduces an opportunity for extra problems. You know, there's quite a lot of criticism there, and it if you pay attention, it doesn't often feel very good. It's natural, but it just doesn't
Mm.
feel great when we're talking that way. Whereas what I found is that when I use the first person and I talk about me, I'm sharing my experience and I'm showing them that I do have feelings and that they are relevant and important. But because it means I don't go to criticism, it feels lighter and easier to manage. So that would sound like, I'm feeling really angry because I feel that it's right that you should eat your dinner. And I'm feeling annoyed because I feel like I've done lots for you today. And so that it's like an equal opportunity to recognize how you're feeling and give it that validation because it's relevant, but it's just a way of doing it that doesn't make it quite so, you know, it's not so much of a clash, I would offer. It's more you're
Yes,
just kind of explaining.
it's a bit less attacky. Like, you've done this and you've done this. That's very attacky, isn't it? And actually, you are, yeah, going from the, well, this is the experience I'm having because of this situation. That sounds like a really good reframe of how all of us can navigate these challenging situations because they happen every day. It's
Yeah.
it's definitely a thing. So, I mean, so moving on a bit from anger, although I think it's so important. I mean, I don't want to come across like we have a particularly angry household, but I think it's every household because of life stresses and
Yeah, for
timetables and
sure.
oh, all the things. But now, if we move on a bit to kind of what about feelings of feeling low, feeling a bit, not, I wouldn't say depressed because that's a particular like diagnosis, but like feeling low because maybe like us, you're super cooped up and you feel your social life is not where it really wants to be. How do you navigate those feelings more kind of in an empowering way, and how around your children to how do you show that in an educational way as well?
Yeah, I think a really helpful distinction just to begin with in terms of the fact that those emotions that kind of stem from sadness, again, very natural and normal feelings that we can all relate to. But you're right, when those start showing up in a depressive way or a really intense way, then there is amazing clinical support out there. And actually, it's wonderful the way that clinical professionals are so well trained to support us. And so I would always signpost someone to clinical services if they felt that those feelings were so intense that they were struggling to function and weren't, you know, where they wanted to be. But separate to that, in terms of just the everyday experience of sadness that we can all relate to, what I would offer is that quite often, like you say, we're cooped up and we're very focused on what's immediately happening because our households are so busy, aren't they? And our kids need so much from us that I think often something that some of your listeners might relate to is that we don't often have an opportunity to continue to practice showing up for ourselves and thinking about ourselves. And often sad emotions can come up for us for several reasons, but one reason that can be really significant is that we somehow feel separate from the experience that we would like to be able to have, almost like that feels we haven't got an opportunity at the moment to show up for ourselves in a way that we perhaps used to, or that we would like to be able to. And I think you're right, the practical limitations of having kids are massive, aren't they? Like, it's such a massive change to suddenly have so much less opportunity for how you want to make choices day to day, and how you want to spend your time. And I think it's really natural for that to produce sadness sometimes. I think one of the things that I've found incredibly helpful is to recognize that just a small amount of time when we invest in ourselves and what we feel we might need can go a really long way. And often we're at the bottom of the heap, where our brain is so well practiced at thinking of our kids' needs and trying to meet them all as best as possible. It's simply fallen out of practice of thinking of ourselves. And it sounds so simple, but I spent 8 months, years there where my brain just wasn't thinking at all about what might be good for me as well. And actually what I recognize now is that that's so important for our children, to see that model, to see that we're human, we have emotional needs as well. Relationships are all about healthy balance, and that other people's needs are really important in healthy relationships too. And so because I was kind of rethinking this and changing my outlook, because we're now coming at it from this conversation, for example, about recognizing how normal and natural those feelings are too. Aside from building in those kind of micro moments where you can show up for yourself in really simple but powerful ways.
Just to interrupt, so the micro moments, does that look like going a bit of exercise for yourself, or taking a bath, or that kind of micro moments you're talking about, or going for a walk, or having a coffee with a friend? Is that kind of thing?
Yeah, exactly that. I suppose the reason I talk quite generally is just because it's quite individual. But yeah, definitely those little moments where we make our nice, hot drink in our favourite mug that's just for us, or we go and sit in the garden for 5 minutes, or we can go for a little walk outside, or it might just be finding even just, I remember realising I never read a book. I really love reading. And I would just get to bed and feel so tired. My brain would be like, this is the last thing you need, Sal, to actually read. You just need some sleep. But what I found is actually just reading 2 pages, it took me a long time to read a book, but I was like, do you know what? I actually really want to be reading, even if it's in a small way. I'm just going to read my 2 pages. That's just for me. I finished the day with a little moment for Sally. And so, yes, to all those moments, whether that's a hot bath or a moment calling a friend, I think we're best placed to decide what that is for us. But yeah, you're exactly that. Those small micro moments that when we ask ourselves, what would be a really lovely way to spend 5 minutes that's actually quite doable, seeing what comes up for us and what might work.
Absolutely. I'm so there with you about reading. I miss it so much. I used to read and read and read, and I don't think I've read for more than 5 minutes at a time for about 4 years. So
Yeah, I can relate to
but
that.
yeah, but okay, great. So actually, it's really important, no matter how busy your work and family, house care schedule is, just to carve out, even if it's a few minutes, that you do something for you, because that keeps that connection to your own needs alive, doesn't it? And makes you,
Yeah, and it's so much
yeah,
more than
okay.
just that moment, isn't it? Because actually, yes, there's that lovely moment of reading the book or making that hot drink just specially for yourself, but it's also that relationship with yourself, isn't it? As your own best friend. And we spend so much time thinking how we can show up for other people that what I find is that those moments are actually doubling down on remembering that I matter as well. Just by bringing those about, you're really nodding to the fact that actually you are significant and worthy and important and valuable, just as everybody is in the house. And so I think it's so much more than just those 5 minutes of kind of micro pleasure.
Absolutely. And one thought that really helps me when I'm kind of struggling to think, to remember about myself, is actually like, you can't pour from an empty cup. So like I always say, okay, this thing I do, although in this, when my baby is napping, I could be doing all other sorts of stuff, but I choose either to have a nap or chill out, veg out and watch a nice program or do some yoga. And these things will be filling my cup. Um, I think if you really think of that filling your cup so that it is full and you can pour into other people again, it can reduce some of that guilt that we can feel as parents, thinking, oh, I could be doing the laundry and I could be doing this. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're so right. And I used to do that for so long. I would get that, like you say, that moment of nap, and it'd be like, great, I can finally do all these things that have been on my list for ages. None of them were for me. Not directly. They were all things that I didn't really care about, but that I was finding I was putting pressure on myself to do. And you're right. Then you, like you say, your cup's empty, you burn out. And what I found was that I was okay till I wasn't. I would be able to sustain it for a certain length of time. Then suddenly, boom, I felt like all my emotions would go absolutely high as anything. Whereas what I found is, yeah, exactly that. When you can build in those moments to keep your cup filled up, it's so much easier to fill ourselves, isn't it? More consistently, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, wonderful. Well, I've loved this point. But I want to move on because the festive season is very near when this episode comes out. And as we're talking about emotional experiences in families, parents, during the Christmas season, of course, children are off school for quite a long time. So there's a kind of, the house is fuller, there's more pressure getting your work done with your perhaps teenagers or smaller children around. And then there's the actual Christmas day and the build up and the presents and the food. So much emotion can probably get tied up. So what are some key advice? What's some key advice that you could give families going into this time?
Well, I would consider how you can take the pressure off. Because I used to be amazing at putting the pressure on, almost thinking like, oh, we just need this bit to be perfect, and we can have this lovely meal as well, and we can do this with the kids, and they'll love that. And then when mother-in-law comes, we can do this as well. And it was all kind of really, it was a lovely idea beforehand, but actually translated just to loads of pressure that was completely unrealistic. And I think because if we're lucky enough to have been brought up in a house where Christmas was actually, quite fun and exciting when we were kids, I think you often have this into adulthood then, don't you, where, you really want Christmas to live up to the happy bit of the title of Happy Christmas, and you really want to give everybody a lovely time. But what I've realised is that quite often I was being completely unrealistic about what Christmas was going to be like. And actually, as parents, we're amazing navigating Christmas with our kids, because there's so much to kind of, like you say, so many things going on. And the Christmas day itself, they're high as a kite on sugar, aren't they? Or I just remember looking at the clock on Christmas Day when my two were little and thinking, oh my goodness, it was only like 6:45 in the morning, and I felt like I'd done a day already, because they're so excited, aren't they? And, amazing. It's amazing they're so excited. But yeah, I think one of the things I learned to do was be a little bit more realistic before times about what Christmas was going to look like, what we could kind of realistically manage, what would be sustainable and doable. Whereas I used to kind of go into my excited mode of trying to think of all the lovely things we could cram in. And so I would offer I've learned that less is more. And just having a realistic thought ahead of time about how much is going to be doable, what might that look like, and actually what do we really want to prioritize. And I think I didn't used to think ahead. I would just kind of navigate it as best I could in the moment. And I think making some of those choices ahead of time in terms of what we were going to prioritize and how was really helpful, took quite a lot of pressure off and made it more realistic, and actually gave us the chance to really enjoy the things we chose to prioritize, because less was more, I suppose.
I love that. Less is definitely more. And I've always had that experience when if you've been invited to two parties, for example, or you've got two things on the same day, and if you try to cram them both in, I mean, it could be amazing, and if you can pull it off, power to you. But often what would happen is you half enjoy both of the things that you've crammed in. And then if you'd done less, you would have had that full enjoyment of the one thing. And I imagine that's the same with Christmas. So you kind of think we keep it really simple. You could be fully present. You don't get stressed because there's other stuff you need to be going to. Um, yeah, and you can enjoy that moment so much more. I love that. So less is definitely more.
Yes. And I would probably also consider going through Christmas now that mine are a little bit older. I've found that building in kind of pressure relief time during Christmas Day and those immediate days where I just know that, emotions are high. There's going to be moments where we just need to take a bit of a break. People might just need to have a bit of space for a minute or head outside for a bit of fresh air, or, somebody might get a bit one of my two might get a bit overwhelmed, and actually that takes a bit of time as well. And so actually what I found too is just building in kind of that idea ahead of time that we might need a bit of pressure release time um, kind of pocketed between the days as well, so that we can have moments of downtime as well as on time that we're enjoying too.
I love that. I love that, definitely. We've already thinking ahead to our Christmas Day. We're going to do it between the two houses, and then in the same town. So my parents' place and our place. And then I was kind of thinking we can do the morning, and then we all have a walk to have that pressure relief and that fresh air, and then do the second half in my parents' place. And then it's kind of I thought about that specifically as some fresh air, different space, bit of pressure release time. So
Oh,
yeah, that was my
lovely.
way
Yeah,
of
brilliant.
planning forwards. Yes. Okay, fantastic. So is there anything else? So challenging parental experience wise, anything else that comes to mind that you would love to advise tired, stressed out parents on who are trying to do all the things to educate their children about emotional experiences, but also to honor their own emotions?
Yeah, I basically you're amazing. Can I just say that to everyone navigating it all? Because it's one of the hardest things I think we ever have to do. And I just think, yeah, we just need to remember how wonderful we are, and in terms of what we're trying to do for our children, and how we're trying to give them the best that we can. And I think often because we're in our own little bubble doing that, there isn't somebody to say, well done for all your effort and everything, in terms of what we're trying to do for our children. But I do think, our kids are so lucky when they've got parents that are really thinking about how to show up for them in the best possible way. And so I think we do need to celebrate how amazing we all are in terms of just trying our best in the first place. Um, I would also say maybe just a couple of things in my head. One is, it can be really helpful. You were talking about the Christmas period where things are really busy and maybe kids are off and stuff. I found it really helpful to meet with like my husband the night before and talk about the next day, which, sounds really simple. But quite often I'm kind of going back to when my children were that bit younger. And often I found that the days that felt the most exhausting were the ones when we were doing loads of problem solving as we went along, as well as all of the emotions side of things. And so I'm not saying plan out your day before and then like a militant, routine, follow that to the letter. But it was more just a chance to say, okay, so actually what's practically happening tomorrow? What does that look like? Do we need to kind of think about how we go about this, or what time of day might be that best to do X, or when should we fit in Y? And it just gave us a chance without the kids around to problem solve that ourselves, so that we could still stay flexible. It's just we got up knowing that we'd kind of done some of that problem solving already. And for people who are single parents, just dumping out onto a page what you've got going on the next day and thrashing that out for yourself and thinking about the best way to navigate that. I just think anything that we can do to release the pressure of having to problem solve in the moment can be really helpful. And I suppose another thought just about emotions and kind of navigating them all together as a family, because it's our thoughts, subconscious and conscious, that generate all our emotions. Actually, just having the chance to be heard and talk about what you're thinking about is really useful for any time when anyone is in when anyone's got a tricky emotion going on. If they want to talk about that, it can be really helpful to start having those conversations, because if somebody's got the chance to talk about how they're feeling, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to instantly agree or that they have to be right and that somebody else is wrong. It's just that when we start talking more about our experience, there's more opportunity for us to understand each other. There's more opportunity for the intensity of all those emotions to come down. And so I would say that building in, and all of this is small steps, rather than it being a big expectation we place on ourselves to have these perfect conversations, which don't exist anyway. We're all just trying our best. But I would just offer that small steps that we can take that allow us the chance to talk more about how we're feeling. And obviously we can model that as parents, can just be a really great way of seeing the kind of experience that we're all having in a way that means it is kind of being processed a bit, and we are talking about it rather than just trying to get through all the time, which can make it quite intense.
Absolutely. And that's a good distinction, because actually, even if you're good at managing that sensation, so you take a really deep breath, you go into a different space, you do your thing. So I'm kind of talking about myself. I am actually good at then breathing away the emotion, but I think it stews, because often if I don't verbalize, if I don't actually address the underlying cause and I think, yeah, speaking about it, that helps. That needs to be done as well as taking that deep breath and letting that emotion pass. So communicating how you feel and why, and so people understand and you feel heard, and then you can let it go
Yeah.
more easily. Yeah.
Yeah, and if
Ah.
you're doing parenting solo, it's also really effective if you can just grab a page of paper and just scribble your thoughts down. You might not have somebody to immediately talk to about those, but actually, we all get that amazing release, don't we? If we're lucky enough to have a friend at the end of the phone and we can talk about everything that we're navigating and thinking, and you get that amazing relief of like, oh, I feel understood, and I've been able to talk exactly about what I'm thinking. But actually, it's amazing how just doing that on a piece of paper in a private way, you can always get rid of it afterwards. Especially if you're just parenting on your own, that's another way that you can just take those 5 minutes we were talking about for ourselves. Yes, it can look like a hot cup of tea, but it can also look about just feeling heard and writing down what your experience is and making sure that you feel that you've had the chance to work through your thinking, can be really effective as well in terms of just showing up for yourself and letting some of those emotions pass a bit and feel less intense.
Yes. Wonderful. Yeah, really good advice for all those champion single parents out there. Respect, everyone.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
so just another question off the cuff. Is Do you find with your clients that men and women are different at how good, I don't want to say good, but like, do they differ in the capacity to express these emotions in this way, to talk about things and to, yeah, do you find a difference between men and women, basically?
Okay. Um, I'm really lucky because I support men and women, which I absolutely love. And no matter what feeling we're feeling, no matter what emotion we're navigating, obviously that does feel the same for all of us. So if we're experiencing worry, regardless of whether you're male or female, that will feel the same in our body. So in terms of building up this understanding that actually our brain produces emotions, we're all feeling them, and that we can relate over that, I think is a really important bridge, especially in our relationships, whether those are personal or professional, just to recognize that actually we are all navigating the same emotions. But you're right when you said about expressing those. I find it's really individual, but quite often there are some common thoughts that are coming up in terms of how we express those emotions. And quite often, I think women have been, not exclusively, but quite often been socialized to believe that meeting other people's needs is really important, especially linked to their worth and how happy they can make other people. And so quite often we've been socialized to have a lot of emotional conversations. You know, we're often been supported to talk a lot about what our emotional experience is. Another difference I would offer is that a lot of men, again, are individuals within that group, but a lot of them have often been socialized to think that talking about emotions is somehow weak, or that they're somehow failing in some way if they're talking about emotions. So you're right, it's not that the emotion themselves is any different, it's just expressing that, I think, can come from quite a different place. But what I found is that, again, we are coming back to that communication side. And I think when you see it more at a bit of a distance and see these as just sensations that we're all navigating, it becomes just more of a kind of curious chat about what our experience is, as opposed to that meaning anything about whether we should be coping better or that might mean we're failing somehow. So I do find that there are some differences, but I think what's really exciting is that they're becoming less and less. And I do think that there's a really big shift in terms of many more men really considering about how they can make emotions work for them. And I just think that's just so fantastic. And I think there's a lot of women thinking more about how they can make emotions work better for them too. So I think we're completely united on how to make emotions best work for us. It's just, you're right, I think they can sometimes be quite differently expressed, or not, you know, that they're not expressed as well is obviously the other side of that.
Yes. And like you said, times are changing and everyone's teaching their young boys and their older teenage boys to talk about stuff. And then hopefully collectively we can help men talk about their feelings, because it is important. But I want to move on from that question, and just quickly, because time is running on, I would love to ask a few closing questions. So one of them I always ask everyone: have you got any pet peeves or anything that drives you crazy in social media, the regular media, or just society, about how people talk about emotions?
Well, one of them nods to what we were just talking about, actually, to do with men and women. And I think, yes, we're recognizing that sometimes there can be like a broad difference in terms of how we express emotion or how we engage in emotion. But I find it most helpful when we talk about how we can relate over emotion, how we can connect over our emotional experience rather than dividing us into men and women. So I find content that talks most about how we can all come together and relate most helpful. I feel like that's most progressive. And so I'm not suggesting that there isn't sometimes differences in how we navigate emotions. It's more just that I get really excited when I see content that's talking about it from quite a unified position, because I just think the more we can do in our relationships, the more we can do in our family life and personal life and community and society is getting more focused on the kind of bedrock that is, we're all emotional beings, you know, we're all navigating emotions. So actually, let's just talk about how we can all support each other regardless. And I suppose another area that I sometimes see on kind of content online is that thick layer of judgment in relation to emotions. And we've talked about that quite a lot today, haven't we? Where there's kind of just a concept that, you know, that someone is better because they're feeling a certain way, they're a better person or a more successful person, or that someone is failing because they're feeling a certain way. And I just don't believe that at all. I believe that we all just experience emotions and we're all as worthy as each other regardless. And so I always really love to see content that's celebrating the fact that our emotions don't define how valuable we are.
I love that. And you know, Your work actually relates a lot to yoga in kind of, I haven't mentioned yoga throughout this whole conversation, but I just wanted to mention it there because in the yogic philosophy, there's different layers to the body, and you have your like inner you, inner sense of like self, which is actually like connected to the universe and whatever energy. And then you have layers, and you have the body layer, you have the emotion layer, and the thought layer, and the breath. So actually, yeah, and often like you can meditate on the fact that your emotions don't define you and your thoughts don't define you. They're kind of part of this collection of layers, but it's not actually your inner essence. So that that very
Love that.
brief overview of the yogic philosophy, but it's very relevant to what you do in your work. So that's exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Lovely. Well, one more closing question. So you sound amazing, and all the stuff you say is so relevant and wise and wonderful. But this podcast is also about recognizing how imperfect everyone is and everything, and the fact that we all have to do things amid the mess and chaos of our lives. So, if you don't mind sharing, what is one of your imperfections?
Oh, yeah, definitely. As you say, none of us are perfect, are we? It's completely impossible. So one of the things that I kind of definitely notice about myself is I am definitely quite I'm not very good at being spontaneous in the moment, particularly with my kids. So when it's a moment where they're like, let's go do this, and it's completely off my radar, my thought is usually still, oh, I just don't know if I've got the energy for that right now. And I sometimes think, oh, I wish I was just better at being that spontaneous parent that kind of is just wonderful at just going with the moment. And I'm not as good at that as I wish I was. Um, and I also think sometimes that they're just they just teach me so much. My kids teach me so much all the time, and I think one of the things that they're really good at is just reminding me how possible it is to think differently about so many things all the time. I mean, they're just amazing at just coming out with like creative questions that I've not thought of, or like new ways of thinking about things. And sometimes I think, oh wow, yeah, I've still got quite a way to go to remember to be as like open-minded as they are and as creative as they are. And yeah, I just think I'm always learning
Yeah.
from other people about how I want to be and who I want to be.
Thank you for sharing. That's really nice to be so open and honest. But I do want to say we all have our superpowers. I believe everyone is different and everyone has their own superpower. And you are very cerebral, I would say. You're very smart and you think about these things. So, that is just so strong for you. So the fact that the spontaneous bit isn't quite there, someone else will have that superpower, but you have your own superpower.
Oh, that's really
So I
kind. Thank
wanted to
you.
just, yeah. Um, but very last question. How can my listeners find out more about you? And if they want to have a chat with you, how could they go about that?
Yeah, sure. So they can find my website, which is at coachingillumination.com, if they're interested in finding out more. I have a free coaching community and they can sign up for a free practical email each week. It's completely free. And it's just a practical email each week where we're kind of rebuilding the way their brain produces emotions so that they can kind of take an empowering step forward each week. So it'd be lovely to have them along with us if they'd like that support. And they can find out a bit more about the coaching that I provide there if they're interested. And also, if they're ever on LinkedIn, I provide content that's from a place of support there as well. If they like the idea of actually reaching out and having a chat, then I do that. People can just approach me and have a chat for free. We can schedule a video call, and that will always be from a place of support, not pressure or expectation. So they can just reach out, and it'll always be lovely to hear from them. And if they want to find out more about what I do, then we can do that then.
Fantastic. Super. And I just want to say, I love your LinkedIn posts. Every Wednesday, you have a really cool little video that you post, and I always love watching it. So thank you.
Oh, that's really lovely. My pleasure. I just love, having the opportunity to just share with people what's possible, really. So that's great. I'm really glad you find those useful.
Ah, definitely. But for now, Sally, thank you so much for talking to us today. Really, and I always enjoy my episodes with you, and it's given me a lot to think about, to take home and practice. So thank you, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you. It's been just brilliant to join you again. And I just think it's wonderful the way that you champion support and kind of really relatable ways that we can move forwards with what is actually really tricky sometimes with young kids and family life. So yeah, it's just been great to support you with that. Thank you.
That was Sally Stockreiser, everyone, all about emotional empowerment. Wow, that is all so useful. Yes, I'm going to be really thinking about the anger thing, the lowness thing, the making sure I carve out those little moments for myself. I mean, I kind of do. So I have my yoga practice that I do whenever I can, whenever baby Daisy is napping, and if I have a work day, I do some exercise as well. But yeah, so much food for thought. What about you? I hope you can find some real action points out of this episode, perhaps going forward for Christmas. And if in your house things sometimes, the SHIT hits the fan sometimes, maybe you or your partner can start to work on them. Not managing, the expressing of the anger in a more empowering way, perhaps. Well, anyway, so I'm going to love you and leave you. But before I do, please consider giving me a rating and review on whichever app you use. If you watch this on YouTube, please remember to like and subscribe and leave a little comment. I would thank you so much. All these things are super helpful and they're a free way that you can support me. So thank you. All right. Well, have a fantastic week and I'll see you at the next episode.